Hello everyone, welcome to my Resident Evil 6 No Hope difficulty, no life cube loss walkthrough, and this is chapter 1 of Jake's campaign. And this is a campaign that took no time at all to record at all, because this campaign is one of the shortest campaigns in the game, alongside Ada's campaign. And this is one of the main reasons why I do like this campaign more than Chris's campaign, because I feel like Chris's campaign was way too long, and because of that there are a lot of bad designs that were heavily apparent with Chris's campaign. And Chapter 2 of Chris's campaign was one of the most annoying chapters in Chris's campaign, because you spent more time just waiting for things to happen, and you were having to clear out so many enemies in these endless encounters that it just really dragged the gameplay out, and it just turned the game into a slogfest. And anyone who finds any enjoyment out of that, I just want to say, get a life if you think that's actually enjoyable. And then with Chapter 3 of Chris's campaign, there was just poor designs everywhere. If you see my walkthrough of Chris's campaign, and you'll see my future poor designs of Resident Evil 6 video series, there are a lot of bad designs that Chapter 3 embraces. And then Chapters 4 and 5 of Chris's campaign had some really bad design choices as well, even though they weren't quite as bad as Chapter 3 of that campaign. And with this campaign, the bullcrap isn't so much. I mean, the bullcrap is still there, however, like this one right here. When you first get to this area, like on the very first instance of starting this encounter, when you first get that checkpoint and you don't restart, when you trigger that cutscene and you're running out that window, you've got to do it immediately. Don't bother going for the pistol ammo, because that chopper on the right, it's almost like it's programmed to fire its missile the moment you actually get through that window. I have like 3 to 4 moments of this happening, and I'm going to include them in my Poor Designs of Resident Evil 6 video series, because it's not fair at all. The moment you get out that window, like even if you try to use the mantle animation again to get back through the window, you're just not fast enough. The chopper fires its missile so fast, and it has a lot of range, and it does so much damage to you, and you're just given no time to react. So that's why you gotta move so quickly and just avoid the pistol ammo. I feel like the pistol ammo is just there as bait. It's so dumb that it would do that. And there are other dumb designs like that in Jake's campaign, and certain parts of Jake's campaign were very, very annoying to deal with. Like Chapter 2, that cabin sequence of Chapter 2 is one of the worst parts of Jake's campaign, because there are so many camera moments where the game is trying to take control of your camera to show you this moment, because this game is just trying to be so accessible to the general population that it sacrifices its gameplay and actual good designs in order to accommodate for that. So the times when the camera shifts and it affects your movement and you can't properly position yourself behind an enemy or get set up and covered properly, it's so annoying. And then the moments where the enemies can move during the cutscenes and you just don't have enough time to react, it's such a load of garbage, and it's something that could be so easily fixed if they didn't include these cutscenes. But no, because of the fact that Capcom tried to target a very wide audience of idiots with this game by putting in those cutscene moments and moments where the characters are trying to tell you moments and all these kind of things, it impacts the gameplay negatively, and it just leads to a lot of poor designs getting through. And also, with the snowmobile section in Chapter 2, the amount of times I was getting hit by Phantom Range on the Avalanche, I say amount of times, I only got hit by the Avalanche's Phantom Range once, but even so, it shouldn't even be a thing. Like, how did that get past Q&A? Like, I don't understand how you could miss something as simple as a bad hitbox on an Avalanche that's chasing you. Like, why do you even bother putting it in your path when you're trying to get through it, and why do they make the path so narrow when you're trying to pick the correct path to get past that Avalanche without getting touched by Phantom Range? Yet another dumb section that Jake's campaign has. And Chapter 3, I can't really think of any bad moments in Chapter 3 aside from that whole ending sequence with the tank, but I need to go into a lot more detail about that. And Chapter 4 is the longest chapter in this campaign, and because you're so stacked on ammunition and you have a lot of explosives at your disposal, you won't encounter so much bullcrap in that section if you're using your resources intelligently. Although I will say though, that big gunfight, like your very first gunfight in Chapter 4, after you do the motorcycle section, it's probably the hardest gunfight in the game, and you have got to rely on the smallest amount of cover in order to ensure that you don't take any damage. And I can't think of any sequence in this game that can be harder than that. And then Chapter 5 wasn't so bad, although Jake's Las Clapanji section is the worst Las Clapanji section in the game. Although I did find some workarounds in order to get past the moments where the Las Clapanji could grab you during cutscenes. But I'll explain when I get to that section. And we've just cleared out those enemies, which I always just rush. And this one right here, I didn't actually know that this could be a thing, but you can take damage from this BSAA chopper. The machine gun that is being fired by this chopper, if you move too fast, Like right here, this is where you can get hit. When you're mantling up here, you can get shot. You have got to make sure that you time your movements correctly so that you do not get hit by that machine gun. And I nearly lost my life cube just then. And in case you're confused as to what I mean by no life cube loss, the 6 life cubes that you're seeing on the bottom right, as long as I don't lose a full life cube, that will actually accommodate the restrictions. If I only lose a portion of a life cube and it just regenerates, it does not count against me in the restrictions. That is exactly what I mean by no life cube loss. And now we're going to move on and just run past these turrets. I can't believe there are people who try to kill these guys on the turrets and just impact the gameplay negatively, all for a kill-all run. And kill-all runs in Resident Evil 6 are so boring, and anyone who embraces that, I don't know what is wrong with you, but you're taking your games for granted if you're trying to embrace such runs, and you're just a burned-out gamer. Like, why do you have to compromise the overall integrity of the gameplay in order to actually get a satisfying feel? Like, you're practically the equivalent of a drug addict seeking a fix if you're going to resort to methods like that in order to somehow achieve a better effect. Like, I'll never understand these people, and that's why I always return to my games at the right moment so that I always have a fresh mindset. And because I haven't played Resident Evil 6 in a while, and I thought it was time to do Jake's campaign, I actually had a lot of fun doing these restrictions and actually playing the game the way it was intended. I mean, the no life cube loss restriction is probably not how the devs intended, because this game is designed around healing items, and that's yet another factor that probably shows why this game has a lot of problems, and it just feels like it was rushed in certain parts. Like, I feel like Chris's, Jake's, and occasionally with Ada's campaign, even though you're not really encountering that many enemies in Ada's campaign, I feel like they were just rushed out the door with the amount of problems you encounter, and with these really bad enemies. Like, the Juavo on this game are the worst enemy type ever, because they just have the ability to take advantage of the vulnerabilities present within this game, and just exploit them to their advantage. Whereas in Leon's campaign, because the combat systems of Resident Evil 6 feel more befitting for the zombies, and the enemy types you encounter are nowhere near as bullcrap as the Juavo, Leon's campaign actually feels like it's properly designed, and it feels properly accommodating for Resident Evil 6, and it just feels like that was what Capcom was intending to do. But then with these other campaigns, it's like, in the last quarter of the development of Resident Evil 6, they just decided to put in these campaigns, and while they did put in a lot of good designs with some of the enemies you encounter in these campaigns, the bullcrap outweighs the positives significantly with those campaigns. And Jake's campaign, as much as it is a little bit more polished compared to Chris's campaign, given that it doesn't embrace too much bullcrap, since this campaign is a little bit shorter than Chris's campaign, it still has that unpolished that I'm just not expecting from a Resident Evil game. At least it makes up for this slightly by putting in some Resident Evil designs that I absolutely love, and what I mean by that is designs that only Resident Evil would actually let you do, and I'll explain them when I get the chance. And we're about to have the first boss fight against Usanok, and Usanok is the best boss of this game. I can't think of a single encounter with Usanok that actually feels bad. This first fight against Usanok can be done with explosive barrels, and he actually responds to your melee attacks a little differently. Like, for instance, if you use Jake's charge attack, where you aim and hold R2 and then rush towards him, it actually stuns him, and I think Sherry's stun rod can stun him as well. But in the later fights, he doesn't respond to stuns differently because he's a little bit stronger. And there isn't any moment where the Juavo really get in the way in this fight because they're under-equipped given that you start with a pistol, and because of the fact that you only start with a pistol, they have to design the encounters to accommodate for that. And you do get a Magnum in this encounter, but I don't pick up the Magnum immediately. I only get the Magnum after this fight because it has multiple locations where it can spawn, and one of the multiple locations that it can spawn in is right after this fight, so that's why I don't pick it up immediately. And there is an opportunity to kill some enemies in order to get some ammo, and I probably should have done that because I didn't have a lot of pistol ammo by the end of this chapter. However, it wasn't that big of a deal because I at least used my other resources intelligently to save up on ammunition. But just use the barrels against him, follow the path exactly like how I take it. And I really wished I played as Sherry for this campaign. I don't really like Jake as much because I think his melee isn't as good as Sherry's, and I know Sherry has that very slow kick that she does as her standard melee, but her other melee is really good. Like, she has the counter that Leon does, and then for the normal context-sensitive melee that she does, it's the exact same reverse roundhouse kick that Leon does, which is very fast and has a lot of range. Whereas the kick that Jake does when he's actually trying to do the normal context-sensitive melee, it takes a while to prep for some reason. Like, Jake has to actually jump, and then he actually does the kick, and it takes a little bit longer to do, and in that moment the enemies can actually attack you. So that's one of the main reasons why I don't like playing as Jake as much as Sherry. And his melee weapon, which is just his bare hands, is one of the worst melee weapons ever, because you're going to be fighting enemies that have guns predominantly, and the melee just isn't very good at dealing with the Juabos that have guns, because they're so good at stun locking you, and the detection on the soft lock for the melee is really bad in this game. It doesn't detect properly, so you'll end up missing moments where you should have nailed a melee, but the soft lock doesn't kick in, and you just kick thin air, and it's so stupid that it works like that. But another reason why I love Sherry compared to Jake is her stun rod, because Sherry's stun rod affords you additional advantages against certain enemies. Like, for instance, with the Mesets in Chapter 2, if Sherry does a charge attack on a Meset, it will instantly kill it, and this allows you to counter-attack their aerial attack, where they have this aerial grab that they do, where they sit still in the air, they signal via sound effects, and then they actually grab you, but you can counter that with the Sun Rod. And then against the Laskabanji, this is something that Fascinator showed me, you can use the Sun Rod to stun lock Laskabanji, and they're very weak to the Sun Rod, and I think it applies a burn effect to them, and Laskabanji are especially weak to fire, so that's why the Stun Rod is really good, and that's another reason why I like to play as Sherry. And I feel like with the reasons that I've listed so far, they represent a vast majority of the positives that I really like about Sherry when I'm playing with her. I just think with Jake, there's not much that he offers that really helps in actually getting the advantage in certain sections. I mean, the only section where playing as Jake is definitely beneficial is the fight in Chapter 4 when you're having to take out the chopper, because Jake has the ability to do a really cool design where you can grab onto the rope that the chopper drops in order to drop a bunch of enemies, and you can use the Elephant Killer to your advantage in order to kill the chopper, and you don't even need ammunition for the Elephant Killer in order to do that. And it makes the section go by a lot faster, and the section can end normally when you just kill all the enemies as Jake and Sherry, but as a quicker option, which can be very annoying at times to pull off, it's a really good idea to get into the habit of doing that, and you actually track the chopper's movements in order to know exactly where it's going, so that you can do that moment as Jake. And right now we are doing a story intersection with Chris, and remember the section from Chapter 2 of Chris's campaign where we have to take out those 3 anti-aircraft guns? Well, this is that same section again, only we're doing it on Jake's campaign, and Jake's campaign, this section is a lot better compared to Chris's campaign, because you're not having to run around with Chris, Piers, and Finn, trying to take out these anti-aircraft guns, and then running the gamut with a bunch of douchey enemies, and douchey snipers, and all sorts of random spawns that are occurring, and you're not having to deal with the Augerman so much. And all you're doing is just sitting back and relaxing, and just waiting for Chris and Piers to do their thing, while occasionally offering some support. And it makes for a more enjoyable section, and it's not so tedious, it's not so dragged out, it's not so mundane, it's not like the olden days where you just killed everything for such a long time in those older style of games, and it's just so bland and boring. It's actually a little more interesting. I mean, it's still going to take about 10 to 13 minutes to do this section, depending on how lucky you get with Chris and Piers' AI, and whether they're doing the objectives very fast or not. But I just think it's a better section overall, and it just doesn't lead you to question the gameplay so much, and it doesn't lead the section to be incredibly boring and repetitive. And if you're getting into any moments where you're just waiting, you can just probably go on your phone or listen to music. Although if you are planning on doing that, you still gotta bear in mind that if any checkpoints trigger or any enemies spawn from this spawn point that you're at right now, they can be problematic, and you might have to deal with additional enemies. But as long as you're taking this into account, you can easily get this section done and just wait it out and just enjoy the show, essentially. Although, if you're having to do that in order to pass the time with a section, then it's definitely clear that this section is way too long. Like, there are certain parts of Resident Evil 6 that just don't feel properly thought out, and I can definitely understand a lot of the criticism that this game receives. I'm still undecided as to where to rank Resident Evil 6 when it comes to my overall ranking of the series. I mean, obviously it's nowhere near as good as Resident Evil 5, and Resident Evil 4, and Resident Evil 7. I mean, is it better than Revelations? That's the only question. This game is definitely better than Revelations 2, but Revelations 1 had a really good campaign, and there was a lot of bullcrap though in Revelations 1, because a lot of the mechanics you couldn't really trust, like the dodge. The dodge in Revelations 1 has to be the worst dodge mechanic ever in the entire Resident Evil series. The fact that Resident Evil Dead Aim and Resident Evil 3 could have better dodge systems than Revelations, there's no excuse for why they opted for the kind of dodge system that they favored in Revelations. The lack of good detection, the moments where the enemies do these really fast attacks that you just cannot properly react to and use the dodge system to dodge them. And then you spend more time just running past enemy attacks or just strafing away from attacks, because that's just how unreliable the dodge system is. And then with the upgrades that you get in the raid mode with the Shadow Dance ability, the fact that the dodge even needs the Shadow Dance ability in order to be good and to actually feel like a baseline dodge. That just goes to show how pathetic the dodge system is in Revelations. But other bullcrap moments in Revelations that could probably bring it down in quality and make it less than Resident Evil 6. The explosive barrel mechanic, the stuns on the enemies, although, I mean, you can already use the customization kits in order to increase your damage to actually deal with a lot of enemies. And then with the highest difficulty of Revelations favoring a lot of bullcrap because there's no grace to a lot of the enemy placements on Revelations, and oftentimes you really question why they decided to favor such options. And I think those are really the main issues that come to mind at the moment. I mean, I'll have to play through Revelations again and do an actual walkthrough of that game that actually feels like a walkthrough rather than my pistol/grenade only run, because that wasn't a walkthrough, that was just a stupid run. And admittedly, I did learn a lot from that run of Revelations 1 when I was doing pistol/grenade only, because I definitely came to understand how superfluous some of the weapons can be at times, and because I was mainly using my pistol, it definitely helped in augmenting certain strategies that I use for certain sections of Revelations 1. So maybe I can be a little bit more liberal with my ammunition when I decide to do that walkthrough of Revelations 1, possibly a no damage walkthrough, because showcasing a game at no damage will definitely show that this game is not too unpolished. Like, designing games around no damage is how you want to do it. I mean, a lot of people don't understand the value in designing games around no damage. Like, designing games around no damage ensures that you are putting a lot of effort into making sure that your systems and your mechanics are properly polished, and then you have to ensure that the enemy placements are perfect. You have to ensure that the hitboxes are a little bit tighter. And I just feel like with the liberties granted by the fact that developers often don't design their games around no damage, it's allowed a lot of bad designs to get through. And sadly, a lot of developers don't really recognize this. Like, Hideki Kamiya is a great example. In his interview with Hideki Kamiya, CrySengine SDA asked Hideki Kamiya the question of, would you ever put in a one-hit kill difficulty? And Hideki Kamiya said he would never do that because he doesn't want to be so forceful towards the players, but I just think he doesn't understand exactly why designing games around no damage is important. Like, you take way too many liberties with games that are designed around healing items. I mean, look at this game, for instance. This game is designed around healing items, and look at the amount of poor designs present with this game, because the developers properly rationalized it to say, oh, just use a healing item and you will not have to deal with this poor design. We'll just allow this poor design to remain in place. You can just use a healing item in order to not make this effect from this poor design too severe. And I just think that's the wrong mentality to ever associate with designing a game. Not I think, that is definitely the wrong mentality that you want to associate when it comes to developing a game. And the fact that Hideki Kamiya couldn't recognize that is one of the main reasons why I don't like him as a developer. I mean, admittedly, Shinji Mikami, when he was developing Resident Evil 1 Remake, he had a very similar mentality to Hideki Kamiya, because Resident Evil 1 Remake is one of the worst Resident Evil games ever made, and it just feels like that game, a lot of times, like, with the way they just place a lot of healing items everywhere, and with the fact that that game is designed for knife only, but at times it doesn't feel like it, and it just feels like you're dragging the gameplay out, you're exploiting holes in the enemy AI a lot. It's almost like they were expecting you to use healing items, and further proof of this is the set of herbs you get before the first Cerberus boss fight. Why exactly do they put healing items in that spot, and why do they allow you to use it 3 times in order to fully replenish you? And then in Chris's campaign, you can even talk with Rebecca in order to heal you. But again, like, with all these designs put in place, it just feels like that game is designed around healing items, and I mean, that is one reason why I feel like Shinji Mikami did not have the right mentality when designing that game, and the fact that he even thought about designing invisible enemy mode, and Shinji Mikami admitted that he did design that game, like, he was the one who came up with that idea. That's just wrong on so many levels, because invisible enemy mode might as well not be a difficulty. It's just a difficulty mode where you're just playing on hard difficulty, the enemy placements are no different, but everyone is just invisible. And does that properly incentivize you to use the guns? Probably, but for a stupid reason like that, to embrace such a supernatural design choice, like a design that does not feel befitting for Resident Evil at all, and just completely undermines the horror aspect of how the enemies are supposed to look. Like, can you imagine the amount of developers that probably were so pissed off by invisible enemy mode when they put in so much effort into designing the enemies, and admittedly the enemy models don't look the best. But even still, like, the people who put in all that work into designing the way the enemies look in Resident Evil 1 Remake, They must have been very insulted when they heard about this design choice. It's frankly no different to Kurigami difficulty from the Evil Within when you're playing the Kidman DLCs. That's not that difficulty, it's just survivor difficulty but with no lights on. So you're having to play the game in a level that just doesn't really make you appreciate how good the Evil Within looks. I mean, the Evil Within looks like a really great game when it comes to its graphics, and it has some really nice lighting, but when you turn all that off, and when you turn off the mystique and the intrigue of traversing the environments of the Evil Within, and you just can't see anything. Like, for instance, with the Crimson City rooftops, you can't see any of the rooftops or the buildings when the lights are off. Like, is that really how you want to design a harder difficulty? That right there is just an insult to difficulty design, and that's just an insult to overall game design. I'll never approve of it. And I'm just glad that Shinji Mikami decided to go away from this mentality and actually become the kind of developer that he is. That's why the Evil Within and Resident Evil 4 are easily his best games ever, and I'm hoping that with some of the new releases that Tango Gameworks is releasing, it's going to make Shinji Mikami embrace another magnum opus entirely, and it's going to once again demonstrate his heightened mentality, and that is just something that I'm really going to look forward to in his later games. But I've just done that whole entire section, which requires no commentary, given that it's very easy on Jake's campaign. I mean, I still don't approve of the Augerman design. I hate how they can take that many hits from their own spike before they eventually go down, and they just have way too much life, and then the whole entire section is just way too long, and I just don't like that section at all. And now we have this encounter with Usnak, which requires you to damage him. There are just some very confusing moments with this fight. I don't know how many hits it takes to actually get Usnak off the helicopter. I mean, the only thing I know for sure is that when he actually throws his first grenade and it causes fire to appear everywhere, it means that the fight is progressing. And this is an example of a fight that if I was playing as Sherry, I could easily do this fight with just the stun rod, because Jake's melee is not useful at all. It has no range, and it just can't hit Usnak properly without getting hit by him. And the thing you need to note about Usnak's melee attacks is that he will never repeat the melee attack for one side. Like, see then, he did an attack for his right side, but I know he's not going to do that same attack again. He's only going to run away, or if someone is on the other side, he's going to do the attack, where he's going to try to grab them. And if you're in front of him, he will also do a grab. And if your AI partner gets grabbed by Usnak, you can press circle in order to free them, and it does a lot of damage. So if you can use that to your advantage and somehow set up the AI in a position where they will always be grabbed by Usnak, you can probably use that to your advantage. Only it's not that reliable, because the AI never does whatever you want. And he's not throwing grenades, and you gotta pay attention to where he's facing after he pulls the pin on the grenade. Depending on where his head is facing, that is where you've got to not be when you decide to dodge that grenade. And every time he rips off the doors, he's not going to do the grenade. He'll only do the grenade if he's entering the helicopter via an opening that he's already opened. And he's doing the grenades again, so I'm just going to make sure I'm not on the side that he's looking at. He's looking to the left just then, so I gotta move over this way. And yeah, that's it. That's the end of the encounter. And I don't know if my AI partner dealt the last blow, or it was my Magnum shot that dealt the last blow. Like, I don't understand how his health works in this fight. It's very confusing. This is one of the times when I really wish this game had some kind of health mod or some kind of health bar system, because it's hard to tell if you're doing damage or not, given that sometimes bosses can get invulnerability frames during specific animations. And this part right here is another confusing part. So the scripting for this whole entire section where you're trying to shoot the choppers down is so puzzling. There are times when you can fire so many shots into the choppers and they just do not go down, but it seems to mainly be the case when you restart the checkpoint. When you're doing this encounter from the very first instance, the scripting seems to work consistently, and what I always do is I first set this helicopter on fire, and then I just duck. The duck is needed for this sequence because Usnak will fire at you with his machine gun. And also, when you restart the checkpoint, there are times when Usnak does not do this. He does not back up like that. If he doesn't back up like that, you've got to run away and go to the back, because he will fire his missiles, and you've got to use your pistol in order to destroy the missiles if he's not backing up. And it's so stupid that that can occur. I don't know how they missed that. Like I said, this game is just filled with so many problems that they could have easily fixed had this game not been too big, and if this game had not been designed around healing items. But for this next part of the scripting, after you take out the missiles and after you take out the left helicopter, you'll want to focus on the right helicopter, and that will most likely cue Usnak to jump to the right helicopter, and then you can finish the fight. And before you shoot the gas tank, make sure you pick up the free pistol ammo here, and then shoot the gas tank. And then all that's left to do now is press X when the prompt appears in order to grab the parachute. You can just mash the button if you don't want to time it. And once the cutscene plays, that will be the end of Chapter 1, so stay tuned for the future chapters. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.